How's it going, everyone? This is my hello, and welcome to the last video in my Let's Play of Chrono Trigger. This is going to be different because I'm mostly going to be talking about things that are not in the Super Nintendo version of the game, along with talking about something that, well, didn't get an answer, per se. So, the main topics are going to be the PlayStation and DS versions of Chrono Trigger. For all intents and purposes, they're more or less the same game. So, here's the thing. The PlayStation version of Chrono Trigger was released in North America together in this thing called Final Fantasy Chronicles, which also had Final Fantasy IV, and that was released in America on July 29th, 2001. But what is important is, in Japan, the PlayStation version of Chrono Trigger was released by itself on November 2nd, 1999. Now, what is interesting is that the sequel to Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, was released on November 18th, 1999. So the sequel was released 16 days after the PlayStation re-release of Chrono Trigger on the PlayStation. Now, why does this really matter? As you can tell, the PlayStation version of Chrono Trigger actually has additional content. Well, okay, not a lot of additional content. It's mostly animated cutscenes. It's almost like how Final Fantasy games on the PlayStation have, FMV sequences. In the case of Chrono Trigger, they drew some animated Dragon Ball-esque cutscenes depicting some certain events in the game, but you may say that these cutscenes are more or less the same filler things you've seen before. And I know a lot of people would argue that the PlayStation version of Chrono Trigger is something you should not touch, even though, for those of you who only have Sony consoles, that is probably the only version of Chrono Trigger you have access to, because this version of Chrono Trigger that was released on the PlayStation is what's available on the PlayStation Network. So the bad thing about the PlayStation version of Chrono Trigger is that it has unbearably long load times. But if you take out the load times, I guess it's a fine port. Now, I did mention that the game has additional anime cutscenes, but some of the cutscenes are of exclusive material. So this is where I'm going to be talking about the ending. So when you beat Chrono Trigger in the PlayStation version, you get your main ending where, you end at the Millennial Fair, and then you see the words "The End" in front of the planet. But after that, one of two cutscenes can play. The first cutscene, we'll call it Cutscene A. It plays when you finish Chrono Trigger for the first time, the third time, the fifth time, or the nth time, where n is an odd number. The other cutscene, which I'll call Cutscene B, is what you see when you beat Chrono Trigger for the second time, fourth time, sixth time, or for the nth time, where n is an even number. So that's how you can see the alternate cutscenes. Now, before I go on, I want to mention the Chrono Trigger port on the Nintendo DS. It's not really much of a port it is a port. Interface has changed because it's on the DS, but a lot of people say it's the superior version of Chrono Trigger. There are some differences, like the translation's a little different. Some people complain about how the translation is a bit too accurate to the point where it has no heart. Which is why some people would say Ted Woolsey, as weird as he was, still did a good job with the Super Nintendo localization. Like, you know, the whole "but you're still hungry" line is a little different. Some people complain about the music not being the Super Nintendo quality, but I'd still say the DS is a very solid version of Chrono Trigger, and at the very least, it's more or less the same as the PlayStation version, where it has the same animated cutscenes, except it doesn't have the long load times. So if you had to choose between the PlayStation and DS versions, I would definitely choose the DS version, especially because the DS also has additional content, like, I don't know, an additional dungeon. But when it comes to the ending, when you beat Chrono Trigger DS and you watch the main ending in the Millennial Fair, it's the same thing. You watch it and then you see the planet and then towards the end, and then it plays an additional cutscene. In the DS version, the additional cutscene is always going to be cutscene A. So can you never see cutscene B? You still can. As it turns out, with one of the new dungeons in Chrono Trigger DS, there is also a new ending. And after you see this new ending, after the credits play, that is when you see cutscene B. So let us examine these new cutscenes, shall we? Let us begin with cutscene A, which would play after the end of the main ending. So I'm going to be talking about over this cutscene since there's never going to be any dialogue, but everyone is pretty much Dragon Ball. I mean, it makes sense since Toriyama, who was behind the original Dragon Ball, was pretty much the man behind the artwork of this game. So if they wanted anime cutscenes, they might as well just have him do the same style. So we have Goku marrying Marl. I never watched Dragon Ball, so I'm not too familiar with the characters. I just know that there's Goku, Gohan, and Vegeta. Oh, speaking of marriages, Ayla and Kino did get together after all. Oh, nice romance. Ooh, Frog, he's not getting married. Instead, he's getting... Oh, now he's getting knighted? I thought he would have been knighted a long time ago. Then again, he left and... What? Your hair isn't long and luscious as it was in... What? You're Vegeta? Oh, this is a little awkward. I guess that's still cool, but... Okay, Glenn, I support your haircut? Not really. I like how it actually plays the Too Far Away Times music here. Nice transition from Frog's theme to Far Away Times. Hell, Melkor, or some other dude who looks like he's from Dragon Ball. It's nice to know that Chrono and Marl get married in the end. So if there's any ship to support, it has to be Chrono and Marl since Chrono and Marl is canon. I wonder how old they are. Like, I wonder if they got married when they were teenagers or young adults. Then again, this is 1000 AD when people should be expected to get married early since that's what they did back then. So yeah, marriage, yay. Robo? I thought you... Oh. So Luca was inspired to make robots. Cool. Okay, Luca, I hope you're actually ready for, I don't know, being a mother if you're just gonna straight up adopt a baby like that. What is it with that baby anyway? And it seemed like that baby was wearing something familiar. But what's the story behind that baby? I honestly have no idea. So, that is an interesting ending. We get to see the epilogue of all of the characters we care about. Except for Magus, I just realized. Then again, speaking of Magus, let me talk about the exclusive DS dungeon. So, in the DS game, this has to be in, I think, New Game Plus, but there is an additional dungeon or two, but the main additional dungeon that people care about is the Dimensional Vortex, which is a rip in the fabric of space-time. And what it basically is, it's basically like a collection of lost timelines or histories, since it's kind of like what we did when we travel through time. We changed the past, or the future. So there were some timelines that, as a result, were deleted because in the end they never happened. So it turns out that they just end up in this lost collection in this dimensional vortex. So when you go through the dimensional vortex, you actually revisit past locations because those are the past locations you've been to before things changed. Also, one of the locations you visit in the dimensional vortex is what is called Temporal Research Lab. Now, here's something interesting that happens in the dimensional vortex. At some point near the end of the dungeon, you'll come across a familiar face. Dalton. That's right, Dalton from the Kingdom of Zeal. Queen Zeal's right-hand man. The one who was willing to kill Schala if he had to. The one who tried to take over the world after the Kingdom of Zeal fell. If you remember, when we fought him, after he tried to take over the world, he was sucked into this weird vortex. As it turns out, that weird vortex took him into the dimensional vortex. Now you fight him, and after you beat him, what he says is something interesting. He swears he will go to Pore to raise an army. Now what is Pore? If you remember from Chrono Trigger, that is the town south of Guardia, right across the sea, or the body of water, or right across the bridge from where Chrono, Marl, and Luca live. So, Dalton wants to raise an army in a tiny village? Okay then. But that is kind of a weird thing to happen, but... So once you finish with the dungeon in the DS version, you then go to the end of time and talk to Gaspar, who says that this new place opened up called the Time's Eclipse. And there you enter this dungeon called... It has two names. In the North American localization it's called Beyond Time's Eclipse. But I think in the Japanese version, people say that this is the true name. The name of this dungeon is the Darkness Beyond Time. And once you get there, you find a version of Magus. Not the Magus you fought with, but a version of Magus from some time period after Lavos was defeated. When you talk to him, Magus reveals that there is a new enemy who had emerged in the darkness beyond time. This new enemy can feed on the thoughts and dreams of everyone in any time period. Magus tries to fight this new enemy, but it fails. Now, there's a part of me that wants to talk more about this boss, and you can find more about it if you actually played the game. But there's a part of me that doesn't really want to talk about it, because this is one of those things you should experience. But I'll say this: what happens when you encounter this boss explains a lot. But I will say what happens at the end. Magus tries to do something very benevolent after you defeat the boss, but Magus fails. And Magus is told that he cannot do the right action that there needs to be a greater power for that right action to be done. And so Magus is told to give up and live life to the fullest before this new enemy consumes everything. After that, Magus is sent away from the darkness beyond time. And what happens is kind of weird. Magus decides to sacrifice his identity in his frustration over his failure, so that when he wakes up in the forest, he feels a need. Well, first of all, when he wakes up in the forest, he wakes up with amnesia. He has no idea who he is or what he was fighting for, but he feels the need to search for something he does not remember. So that is the new ending of Chrono Trigger DS. And after you view the credits, you then watch cutscene B. Like I said, it's one of the alternate cutscenes you can watch in the PlayStation version, but in the DS version, watching the new ending is the only way to watch this ending. Sadly, cutscene B depicts something we did not want to learn about after finishing our adventures. Only 5 years after saving the world, the kingdom of Guardia is invaded and it falls. Now, with information from the DS version, we are 90% sure what is going on. Dalton somehow ended up in 1000 AD, or sometime after that. He did, as he promised, raise an army in Poray, and with that army, he invaded Guardia. And people say that one of the shadowy figures of the two men fighting was Dalton. So Guardia was taken over, the Masamune was stolen, and it does raise a lot of questions, however. Maybe too many questions, like what happened to Chrono, Mar, and Luca? Are they okay? Or were they killed? After all, Marl is the princess, and if Chrono married her, he's effectively the prince. So they would have been the primary targets if Guardia were invaded. But if not, they must have had to have run away, because they were targets. And Luca, she was close to them, so they would have come after her too, wouldn't they? It's depressing and scary to know that the lives of Chrono, Marl, and Luca become so bleak so soon after they save the world, save the future. Like, after all that, it wasn't worth it. Or was it? Now, there is one thing that we never got an answer to, and that is, what happened to Magus' sister, or Giannis' sister, Schala? The last we saw of her, she used the last of her powers to get all of us away from the Ocean Palace to safety, but because she used the last of her powers, she was unable to protect herself or take herself away from the destruction, because the Ocean Palace was freaking out, the Mammon Machine was freaking out, Lavos, who was there, was freaking out. It may be safe to say that she is dead, but what if she's not? That is a question Magus asks himself when he goes to search for Schala, as Luca had, acknowledged in the ending. Magus just goes to search for his lost sister. But I want to bring up something interesting. It wasn't always like this. There was an original timeline. Remember Magus's flashback? When he talked about how he was sent away from his home into 600 AD due to the accident in Ocean Palace? The accident was incredibly different. There was no prophet to change the course of time. All that happened was that Queen Zeal was too hungry for power, like before, but then Lavos appeared, and then Lavos wreaked havoc, and that was the end of the story. There was nothing about Chrono, Marl, Luca, everyone else fighting to resist Lavos. There was no prophet making Queen Zeal crazier and making her banish Melchior, Balthazar, and Gaspar. After all, Melchior, Balthazar, and Gaspar were still there. So I do have to ask the question. In the original timeline, would Schala have been able to use her powers to escape? Or would she have died? So in a sense, Magus still has no idea what happened to his sister in either the original timeline or the timeline he has to accept, because we have a new timeline now. And what happened to Schala? We were partially responsible because we interfered by changing everything, Magus included. We changed what happened, and Schala might have had to have paid for our actions. So, we did save the world, we did change the future for the better good, but we didn't do it perfectly. But then again, I guess that's to be expected. We can't change everything. We can't save everyone. And even if we do, sometimes the people we want to save end up being lost anyway. So, this is a depressing way to end Chrono Trigger, but this is what I wanted to address in this video. The PlayStation and DS endings, and, well, the topic of Schala, Magus' sister. And with that, I believe I am done with this Let's Play of Chrono Trigger. It has been an interesting project. It's satisfying to have finally finished Chrono Trigger after, well, quitting it in my first attempt. So it feels good, even though it wasn't a perfect project, but I feel satisfied. I'm glad, personally, and I hope you have enjoyed this project from the beginning to the end, or whenever you dropped in. I hope you have enjoyed this project, and I hope you enjoy my future endeavors, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you for watching.